That's right. Mess Around Friday edition. Boots and pants and 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 boots and pants. Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Honda. Mace, I was just watching Mark Rebele on YouTube before this show, so I guess it's apropos that I would be playing a little house music as we enter today's program.
Also, because you're in your house, I'm in your house. So what's more appropriate than house music?
Exactly. There you go. That's how we get it done on this show. It is Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Ponda. We are talking about the Denver Broncos, and we have a large conversation to get to, especially in the middle section. But let's talk about Jacob Martin not returning to Denver, but he is returning to very familiar grounds, Mace.
Yeah, it was interesting. This is only newsworthy because Sean Payton included Martin among those players who he said could be brought back last week when he was asked about Martin in particular at the end of his press conference. Now, of course, the Broncos did bring a player back this week. It was Tyreek McAllister. They released him, or I should say they waived him before rookie minicamp. They brought him back earlier this week. They also made Kareem Jackson official this week, but they didn't they didn't let his contract expire, and then he sat on the market, and the Broncos brought him back. So that possibility ended, and you and I talked about it when Martin got released by the Broncos. They saved cap room, but the other thing here is that there wasn't really going to be a lot in terms of snaps for Jacob Martin unless somebody got hurt. You have at least equivalent players that you want to see where they go. Guys like Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito, Drew Sanders can bounce outside. They're going to give long looks to Christopher Allen and Thomas Incoom, a guy that we've discussed as one of the undrafted players who might make the 53. So really, if Martin was going to come back, it was going to happen down the line, I think. They got looks at some of the other players, and Houston just pounced. And then, hey, good for him. He's got a stable spot. He's going back to a place that he played for 3 years, even though he's got a different coaching staff now. But we cloak him.
Yeah, I think it's a great move for Houston, and the Broncos don't really need to. It'd have been nice, I guess, if they'd have kept Martin around or brought him back, whatever. But, no, with the other talent in place, give him a shot. And I'm glad he got on quick because this is the time of year where you can sit out there. Look at our pal Dalton Reisner, who's still sitting out there.
Yeah, I mean, Dalton Reisner, did you expect him to be still sitting on the shelf 2 months into the league year?
No way.
I mean, this is wild.
It's weird.
I mean, did he price himself out of the market? I mean, our friend Chris Harris Jr. spoke to Chris Thomason of the Denver Gazette recently, and with him, it's just he's waiting to see what things look like as you get into training camp and even in the season. At this point, he's interested more in just parachuting in to a team that is a contender reps. It's a different thing for him because this would be for Chris Harris 13. Dalton Reisner's in year 5, and he certainly wasn't thinking in terms of parachuting into a team that's a contender. He's thinking, I got to go where the best possibility is, and that's not availed itself to him. And the thing is now for Reisner, teams are moving on with their plans by and large on the offensive line. I don't know that there is an Evan Mathis type of situation looming here for Dalton Reisner. Mathis voluntarily waited, signed with the Broncos during training camp of 2015, ended up starting on a team that, of course, won the Super Bowl. I don't think there's anything like that in the offing here for Dalton Reisner.
Yeah, you get what you get. You don't throw a fit, and that's where it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
at with Dalton. And I will say this, Mace, is are we going to see the veterans? Because he's not on Chris Harris Jr. or even in Kong Su. You've
Yeah.
seen the reports where they're like, I don't want to go to training camp, but I want to sign.
Yeah.
So, like, Reisner's not those guys, but are we
No.
going to see that for some of those older veterans? Like, I don't want to go August, no. September, call me.
Yeah, sure. Because you don't want to go through it, through those paces. You stay fresh, and then you evaluate the situation a bit. And at this point, if you've made your money, the only consideration is okay, where can I add some more laurels to my resume? Right. That's all that is in consideration. So you wait, see how teams look, see what players get hurt. I mean, I wouldn't even put it past the Broncos to bring in Chris Harris Jr. if they have an injury at cornerback at some point between now and the start of the season. I mean, knock on wood, but if something happens to one of their top three cornerbacks, including K'Wan Williams in the slot, then I do think you pick up the phone and call Chris Harris Jr. Now, that being said, he's not the Chris that he was for most of his career.
Right.
He's in year 13. He has lost a step, and I'm not sure that he had that step to spare to begin with, but he's incredibly savvy. He will make up for that with, like you say, you point up here, being a very smart player. Um, so, yeah, I think Chris will end up somewhere in due time. But Dalton Reiser, man, I mean, this is just crazy. I mean, you think let's just look at some other Broncos of similar career performance who, after 4 years, moved on. I mean, remember Raheem Moore got a contract with Houston after his rookie contract expired.
Right.
I'd say Dalton Reiser is a pretty comparable player in terms of performance and resume at a different position, and yet there's been absolutely nothing for him.
I was thinking Matt Paradis when you brought up other Broncos. I was trying to do the math in my head. I was like, how long was Paradis with Denver before he moved on? He doesn't like John Elway,
Right.
allegedly, or whatever I have to say.
But he got a good deal with Carolina, did
Yeah,
Matt
Carolina
Paradis.
paid him.
Connor McGovern left, and I believe it was the New York Jets
Yes.
gave him a contract, and he started. So think about that. Connor McGovern, and you could say Connor McGovern, Dalton Reisner, actually very comparable. Some may even say that Reisner's a bit better than McGovern.
I would say
McGovern had no problem finding a spot in free agency after his rookie contract expired. And Dalton Reisner, man, just
he's not hurt.
yeah.
He's not a bad guy. There's no off-field concerns with Dalton Reisner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's absolutely perplexing to me. Brad brings up a point about 31 other teams see what the Broncos did. Is it just but it's not even that. I mean, football business is like, yeah, the Broncos stink, and there's that stink, but you're talking about 4 years of starting experience.
Yeah.
Mostly healthy, mostly, okay. If you want to say Dalton Reisner was average at best, okay, that's fine. I'm not really going to argue that much, but average at best will still get you a contract in March.
Typically, I mean, is he headed toward the Cam Fleming realm where you sign with a team right before the start of camp and you fight for a backup spot, and then if someone is injured, you end up playing? That's basically where Dalton Reisner might be headed if he wants to play this year. I still think he's going to end up somewhere, but if his expectation is to go someplace and immediately be installed as a starter, barring an injury, I don't see that being a possibility. I mean, basically, if he's going to be a starter, it's probably going to be a Ryan Clady, Ryan Harris type of scenario where Clady back in 2015 got hurt in OTAs, and then you signed Ryan Harris right away and you plugged him in. That may be the only way we're talking about we're talking about Dalton Reisner being somebody's starter. And another thing on Reisner, and you have to think that maybe the sideline incident on Christmas Day with Brett Rippon, shoving Max, shouting Max with the backup quarterback, you have to think maybe that's hurting his reputation a little bit.
Which is unusual because that was over not picking up Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too deep or personal, and I have not talked to Dalton Reisner about this. So I want to make that very clear. This is not me telling you something y'all shouldn't really know. Like, this is just me hypothesizing. But it's like, okay, so if there's a little bit of beef with Russell Wilson, that's going to cause other teams not to pick him up. But yeah, that was not a good look.
It wasn't.
And it's certainly probably the lasting image for teams out there.
Turned out to, I mean, that was his next to last game, as it turned out, right? Because he played the following week and got hurt.
Yep.
But yeah, I think with all respect to the game he played in Kansas City on New Year's Day, frankly, I think that's what people remember, and it's not a good image. I mean, and is that a little bit unfair to him? Yeah, but I mean, this is the NFL. But I mean, if you told me back in February that we'd be sitting here on March 19th and Dalton Reisner would not be anywhere, I would have said you're crazy. It's a 4-year starter, not a high level starter. We're not talking about Pro Bowler, but a 4-year starter you'd think was going to end up somewhere getting a contract from somebody and being in someone's lineup, and that has not proven to be the case. It's definitely a cautionary tale, and you wonder kind of what he's thinking, because remember back at the end of the season, he talked about looking forward to going on the market. Like, he knew he was gone from the Broncos, and he seemed pretty eager to see what was out there. Well, not anymore.
What about now? And there was a recent picture from Lauren Landau who tweeted out or put on Facebook or something of Dalton, working out for him and working out with him. And people always ask me, like, bring him back, I think that's kind of broken, but it is the business of football. And like, if there's an injury, this is good news for the Broncos.
Yeah.
Because, if someone gets banged up, you got a guy that knows your, locker room anyway and can be plugged right in. But chances are, Mace, he might go to August without a job. We're at the end of May.
Yeah, very much so. And it actually might behoove him to do that and do the thing we talked about with a Chris Harris Jr. or, Terrell Suggs in the last few years, and just wait for the right opportunity to avail itself rather than just going someplace. The way that right opportunities with the Broncos is if there's an injury to either Ben Powers or Quinn Miners. I think it's clear. Ben Powers, first of all, that was a huge Broncos free agent signing right there at the start. And that's Dalton Reisner's position. That's left guard. I mean, they basically took that spot away. So then you have right guard. Frankly, I think Quinn Miners is a better fit, and the Broncos know that he's a better fit schematically than Dalton Reisner would be. So then you're talking about Reisner needing to make a position switch. Well, it's not going to be the right tackle, a spot where he has some college background, because that's Mike McGlinchey. And what about center? Well, they, at this moment, seem inclined to give Cushenberry a look, but they also made a fringe move as well with signing a center who'd actually work with Russell Wilson in Seattle back in the 2020 and 2021 seasons. So it's not here, and it's tough. I mean, unfortunately, Dalton Reisner, when it comes to free agents, may end up becoming one of those guys with a cautionary tale.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's get to our next topic. Orange Blue Today, presented by Champ Honda. Ring of Fame, who should be next, Mace? That's a 3-hour conversation with you and me. Maybe with some cold pops one day. Even next week when you get back to the Mile High City.
I have to say that we could probably extend this, and I think we will probably extend this discussion to be had at various points in the next few weeks. But it's really interesting to look at, because there were no Ring of Fame inductees last year. And clearly there's a backlog. If you start looking at resumes, you say, okay, probably Al Wilson's got the best resume of anyone who's not in. But believe it or not, someone who's right there with him is a Riley Odoms from the 1970s into the early 1980s, a 2-time first-team All-Pro. And he's not yet in the Ring of Fame. So the question I ask to you, Cease, is this. Do you think the Broncos should focus on the best resumes in starting to work through this backlog? Or should they, if there's any doubt, be more inclined to get older players in first while they can still experience this. And the thing that goes through my mind, of course, not a player, but the late Red Miller, who should have been in long before, in my opinion. He didn't finally get the call until 2017. At least he lived long enough to know he was going in, to where Joe Ellis, then the president and CEO, made the call to Red Miller to tell him he was in the Ring of Fame. So at least he got that experience. But tragically, he passed away. He actually had a stroke while watching the season opener at home that year, and he died before his induction actually happened. And so I keep thinking of that. I'm like, okay, I don't want that to happen. So, like, you have someone like Riley Odoms, who's in his 70s, and to me, a two-time All-Pro from back in the 70s, who probably should have been in long ago. That's where my priority list starts.
Yeah, my backlog, because when we talk Ring of Fame, I always think, why aren't they like every year? What? Like, and I understand the ownership and all that drama, but we're already way past that. So take care of that backlog. I was thinking Ed McCaffrey, getting him in, Smoke Dog Al Wilson, like you mentioned, but Odoms has to be near the top of my list for sure, because those older players, and just to me, Mace, this is why it's such a large conversation. Like, I want to remind like the young fans who, you know, we got really good Broncos fans here in the chat room talking about Rulon Jones and stuff, but I want to remind that younger generation who may not remember Riley Odoms, who was honestly before our time, even my time, Mason. I'm old, but like, you know, I just, there's a history, there's a rich tradition here with players like a Riley Odoms, a Rulon Jones, etc. So yes, I love Ed McCaffrey, I love Smoke Dog Al Wilson, but there are others that I think should be moved towards the front of the list for multiple reasons, not only so they can experience it, but also so that a new generation of Broncos fans can look back on the past and see like, hey, these guys were getting it done, you know, 40 years ago.
Right, exactly. And so for me, the list would start with Riley Odoms and then Steve Foley. Steve Foley, of course, is the franchise's all-time leader in interceptions. Now, back in 2014, you got somebody who was at the time the all-time leader in a statistical category without a Pro Bowl or All-Pro appearance, and that was sacks, and that was Simon Fletcher. You got him in back in the 14 class. That was well-deserved. That was a long time coming. And so the thing with the Ring of Fame is it's not like a one-size-fits-all, but you have to say, okay, if you've got certain lines on your resume, you don't have to have all, but if you've got a certain layer of accomplishment, you're in. Okay, so like if you are a two-time first team All-Pro as a Bronco, that's something that likely says, okay, you should be in. That's Riley Odoms. If you are a career leader in a major statistical category, like interceptions, Steve Foley, okay, fine. You should be in. And those two from the distant past, that's where you start. You could even see, if we want to have one more from kind of the Orange Crush era, you could even make a case for someone like Lyle Alzado. Of course, the thing that worked against him was how he basically forced his way out of Denver after 8 seasons onto Cleveland and then the Los Angeles Raiders. But the level of accomplishment in Denver was very high and certainly would warrant being in the conversation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I should know better than this, Mace, so I feel bad even asking it, but again, Alzado was 77 before Mech, right?
Yeah. That's right.
I mean, that's 77. That's a special number. Seven's a special number for the Broncos, but that's 77. Alzado, didn't he fight Muhammad Ali, right?
In 1979 at Mile High Stadium. Yes, it was right in the middle of his contract dispute. That was when all the stuff was going down, but he literally fought Muhammad Ali at Mile High Stadium, I think in July of that year. And if I recall correctly, all those involved took a financial bath.
Yes, I believe so as well.
It was bad. So, that was that was when all the stuff was happening in terms of things going sideways contractually, and of course, it did end with him becoming Cleveland Brown when all was said and done. He didn't play. I think that was. I think if I'm not mistaken, that fight may have been the last thing that he did at Mile High Stadium as a Bronco. Mainly because, after he didn't play for the Broncos again, he went on to the Cleveland Browns. So, and that is another thing. You have to sometimes let go of how things ended, perhaps, or other things that happened. Like Al Wilson, for example, should he have been in a while ago? Absolutely.
Yes.
But of course, there was a lot of ugliness involving the neck injury that he had at the end of his Bronco career, back and forth with the doctors, the trainers, and all that. There was a lawsuit at one point. But Al Wilson's greatness as a Bronco was undeniable. And if not for that injury, he would have played longer. But when you crank up 2 All-Pros, and I think it's 4 or 5 Pro Bowls over 8 seasons, I mean, if he's not in the Ring of Fame, what are you doing here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's going to take some time, because you can't have a huge class. I don't think you want to do like 4 or 5, but you start parsing through the names here, and we've barely talked about Rulon Jones, who has a very good case. I don't think we've at all mentioned Ed McCaffrey yet. He has a case. Trevor Price is somebody who I think has been a little bit forgotten. He's got a Ring of Fame worthy resume. As we draw to more recent times, Ryan Clady is somebody who should definitely get consideration.
For sure.
Elvis Dumervil should definitely get consideration. Again, similar to some of the other examples, don't focus on how it ended, the whole fax machine thing. Focus on 3-time Pro Bowler, first-team All-Pro as a Bronco in effectively only 6 years, because he had 1 year wiped out entirely because of an injury. That's a Ring of Fame worthy resume. It's not the Hall of Fame. It's not the same level of accomplishment that you have to get to. So, I mean, I look around and I see players that are in the Ring of Fame, with all respect, like Paul Smith, a very good interior defensive lineman. I would argue that Elvis Dumervil was at least his equal, if not better. And so, yeah, you've established some standards that tell me that there are a lot of guys who aren't in the Ring of Fame who should be in the Ring of Fame.
Well, and that's why it makes that 0 so criminal last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like 0 with the backlog. 0, It's not 0. It's definitely not 0. When we're naming off a dozen players, and there's more that we could, and that's why
there's more coming.
There needs to be there. Pretty soon we're going to have the no-fly zone all in as one. That's my dream anyway, Mace. But look at that.
Yeah.
There needs to be, and this is why through the Mr. Bolin stuff, and we all miss him so much, Mace. There needed to be someone to shepherd this team, and Joe Ellis did Joe Ellis's job. I happen to like Mr. Ellis. I know I don't like what he did with the Broncos. I'll be honest. I happen to like him as a man. He's always been nice to me. I appreciate that. But there needed to be someone overseeing this thing, not playing pretend owner, but understanding and shepherding the franchise to the next level, instead of just trying to hold things together so they didn't fall apart until you could hand it off to the Walton Penner group. No, 0 is uncalled for. All
right. Now, to be fair, on Joe Ellis's watch, they did have a significant clean out year, and that was 2016. I know I mentioned Fletch was 14. He was actually 16. My bad. The 16 class was John Lynch, 4 years, 4 Pro Bowls, Fletch, and Jason Elam. So, in the 14 class,
did the John Lynch thing seem like a way to piggyback on his Hall of Fame?
A little.
All due respect to John,
to help push him over the line.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
But again, I say, if you are a Bronco for 4 years and you are a Pro Bowler 4 times, now that last year, I think we can agree, wasn't really up to John Lynch's standard, but the first 3 years were.
Honestly, there was one of those years Nick should have been in a Pro Bowl.
Yeah,
and
05.
He would never say that, but I'll stick up for Nick Ferguson. He should have been in that year instead of John.
'05, Nick Ferguson and John Lynch should have both been Pro Bowlers, in my opinion.
Yes. Yes.
That year, the two of them, they were the best safety combination in the NFL. And then, of course, Champ was locking it down at corner. Best secondary in football back in '05 belonged to the Denver Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, two Hall of Famers playing at levels worthy of the gold jacket. And then Nick Ferguson having the career year as well in there. And then Darren Williams and Dominique Foxworth and then Carl Payman. You had those young guys as well. That was a terrific secondary back in '05, but I digress. But yeah, you had that year, 2014, the first year after Pat Bowlen stepped away. That was another clean out year with Gene Mingo, Dane Reeves, and Rick Upchurch. So it was actually really interesting when Joe Ellis was there. One thing that he actually did well at was keeping the Ring of Fame train rolling. You had Joe Ellis was on the job for 8 years after Pat Bowlen formally stepped away. Okay. In those 8 years, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 Ring of Fame inductees. So I would say if that wasn't a Joe Ellis thing. Last year, when the team was sold, as I was told, that there was just so much going on that they elected to just put it on pause. I can understand that, but now I think you need to get back to normal this year. And I think a way to get back to normal is to start talking about this backlog because the backlog that still exists, unless you want to say and fully commit to, we are putting one in every year. And to me, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Camp puts one player or coach or official in every year. Every year. The only years that they've missed are 1983. I'm not sure why they missed 1983, but 2020, the COVID year as well. Right. Other than that, since the Chiefs set up their Ring of Honor, they've had someone go in every year. They tell me that the Broncos were going to guarantee or say, okay, that is actually doable because then over time, you're going to be able to take care of everybody over the long haul, even accounting for those who are going to go in. You mentioned the no-fly zone. It'll be interesting to see how that does. Aqib Talib and Chris Harris Jr. have Ring of Fame resumes on their own. Yes. Aqib, the John Lynch corollary, 4 Pro Bowls, 4 years as a Bronco. Chris Harris Jr. was an All-Pro. I believe, I think 2 times second-team All-Pro, 1 time first-team All-Pro to go with multiple Pro Bowls. That's a Ring of Fame resume. And he ended up being All-Decade, and so he's going to be in the Hall of Fame conversation too, as well.
Yes.
But then what do you do about T.J. Ward and Darian Stewart? I mean, they were good players. T.J. Ward does not fit the 4 years minimum playing for the Broncos to be a Ring of Famer. So that'll be an interesting discussion. The Broncos don't have any units who are in the Ring of Fame. Like in Miami with the 72 Dolphins, the whole team is in their Ring of Honor, Hall of Honor roll, I think is what they call it down there. The whole 72 team is in, but they also have individual honors for guys who are on that team. So the whole 72 team is in, but you've also got Bob Greasy and Paul Warfield and Larry Zonka and Manny Fernandez and guys like that who are in their honor roll. So I'm fascinated to see how they handle the no-fly zone, really, because they're an important part of Broncos history. But I would also say this: if you're going to have the entire no-fly zone in the Ring of Fame, then you probably ought to do the same for the Orange Crush too. That's something that is something to think about as you go forward. But yeah, we start parsing through recent years. Chris, Aqib, Von Miller, Demaryius Thomas. I think you could even make an argument for an Emmanuel Sanders as well.
Yes,
if we're talking about Ed McCaffrey, I think if we're talking about Ed McCaffrey, I think we all talk about Emmanuel Sanders being a Ring of Famer too. So I think there's more. I think is enough to where if the Walton Penner ownership group said we are going to commit to making sure we have one Ring of Famer every year from now into the next 10, 20 years, that I think they'd be pretty well covered with quality, in my opinion. So even though you don't like to borrow something from the Kansas City Chiefs, I would think long and hard about that, saying we're having one Ring of Famer every year.
The only thing you like to borrow from them is the Lamar Hunt Trophy.
Yeah. Does it? Yeah, of course. The thing is, now they have as many as the Broncos do. Yeah, and who's probably going to get another one next?
And on that note, have a great weekend, everybody.
I don't want to say it. No, we got one more thing to get to before we go. We got to get to something. Oh, you want to get to Savage AP next week?
Okay, we can do it next week. That's kind of evergreen conversation, and we're going to get back to more of this Ring of Fame conversation because I think that's fascinating as well. So
we could almost do one player a day for like weeks, and and just to kind of clue you in on what we've got planned here, we're going to keep this going through the dead time on the calendar, right?
Yeah. So maybe that's one of our ideas. I looked at the calendar, Mace. We'll have this conversation off air, but it's 14 shows. 14 shows in July, basically, that we'll be doing when we're
late June as well, right? I think because I think we're going to put basically after OTAs, and it ends with the end of mini camp. I believe it ends on the 15th, and we finish up that week, and then I believe we've got about 5 weeks where we're going to be putting stuff in the can. But that's going to lead. We have a lot of ideas of discussion topics. And look, we are not going to leave you hanging. We're going to have plenty of stuff for you, even in that down period. So stay tuned, keep watching. And hey, we may actually, the funny thing is, we may actually be taking some time off, but it will not appear here as if we're taking time off. That's the key thing.
Right. Unless the show doesn't post, and then we'll be scrambling behind the scenes to get something done.
Yeah. All right, we got emergency show. I'm like, okay, where am I? I'm
in Delaware.
Hi, I'm in Delaware. Actually, I'll spend a few days up in the North Woods, up in Minnesota. I'll be up there for a week. If you're a fan of the film Fargo, you know Brainerd, right? There's a pretty nice place up there that I'm going to be staying for a week. So it'll be lovely. Yeah.
All right. Stay away from the wood chippers.
Oh yeah. Don't you know? I'll probably do the entire show talking like this. Oh, hey, no, how's the fricassee? Oh, yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go with the Radisson. Gonna get the Radisson in Minneapolis.
When she's at dinner with her friend from high school, and he's like, "I'm so lonely."
Mike Yanagita. By the way.
Yes.
I don't know. Like when I first saw the movie, I did not know what to make of that scene. There are some very smart takes on that show you why the scene with Mike Yanagita is so important. You know, her, first of all, Marge gets all gussied up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she does her hair, puts on some makeup and all that.
Right.
But suffice it to say, her perspective on the entire crime that she's investigating changes because of that scene, and then what she learns from her friend after having that dinner, and learns that Mike was actually full of crap, and and had a lot of problems, and was basically deceiving her. And then because of that, she goes back to Gustafson Motors to meet Jerry Lundegaard, and then things really start to unravel. So anyway. Yeah, when I read that, I'm like, oh my gosh, clicked. It made, after all these years, that scene kind of made sense. Yeah,
it's a real smart scene.
It's why the Coen brothers are geniuses.
Yeah, and in well-written movies, and I guess I didn't know this or notice it until I read Save the Cat, writing screenplays myself.
Yeah.
Every scene starts one way, ends the opposite, if it's a well-written scene. So every scene that you see in a well-written movie should begin happy and end sad, or begin sad and end happy, or begin angry and begin happy. Like you're going to see a change in emotion. And in that scene specifically, you do see that from like, I'm going out with a high school friend to catch up, and then realizing why you're there, and then realizing how, that deception can be there with more than just your old friend from high school.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really just, it's
beautiful.
It's brilliant. It's beautiful. And I'll be thinking about that, and knowing everybody who's on the trip with me the entire time, just, get quoting that, I'll be saying, "Where's pancakes, host? What? You had pancakes for breakfast? I'm bleeping hungry now,
All right. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey. We're orange and blue today. We're presented by Champ Honda. We appreciate each and every one of you. Do the YouTube things, like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid, and watch all the way to the end, please. It does help the ever elusive YouTube algorithm. He's Mace. I'm Cease. OBT is BFD. Until next time, be safe, be kind. Know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned, and as always, please stay frosty.